In this exercise, I'm going to explain how you create rich blacks, which are very easy, by the way. I'm also going to explain why you need them, why they're so incredibly important. Now, quite by contrast, I've gone ahead and saved the most recent version of my artwork as weakblacks.ai, found inside the 07 Fill Stroke folder. And here's the idea. If I were to click on any black object inside of this illustration, such as this four-pointed shadow right there toward the center of the illustration in the zoomed in view, I'll go ahead and scoot it over just a little bit, and then check out the fill color here inside the color panel, you'll see that C, M, and Y are all set to 0% and black is set to 100%. So you would think, great, that's black for you. You got 100% black ink. What more do you need? Well, you need a lot more. Let's say that we're going to commercially reproduce this document. If you've ever been to a commercial printer, they have these ginormous print devices. They're like multi-story devices. They're just absolutely the size of buildings. And they have this amazing amount of paper whipping through them at speed so high you can barely see the pages go by. Really happens quickly. So it's amazing that the whole machine just doesn't fall apart. But what's happening is the pages are being yanked between plates. And there's a plate of cyan ink, followed by a plate of magenta ink, followed by a plate of yellow ink, followed by a plate of black ink. Not necessarily in that order, but all four plates are there at some point in time. And so what can happen when all this stuff is going by so very quickly is that the pages, as they go through the various plates, and each page goes through independently, they can go slightly out of register. Now, what's astounding is that they're not more out of registry than they sometimes are. A typical commercial printer makes sure that your objects are at least within a half a point of each other, maybe even tighter than that. But even a half a point can be a big problem. So here's why. You've got this black object right there that's just black ink and nothing else. And it's surrounded by a bunch of other objects that have no black ink associated with them whatsoever. So if the inks are slightly out of register with each other, then you'll see a very tiny sliver of white between the various objects. And even though it's slight, it's very noticeable, especially to people who know what they're doing, and it's a very embarrassing thing indeed. And you want to make sure to trap those gaps, to close those gaps up with inks that are shared between the neighboring objects. Secondly, if you rely on weak blacks like this, where you're relying on black ink and no other inks contributing, then your blacks are actually going to look quite light. They're not going to look like super rich jet blacks, which is what you want. Instead, they'll look like charcoal grays. And that, my friends, is ugly. The solution is to create a rich black and use it. And here's how it works. So I'm going to go ahead and click off my artwork to deselect everything. I'll switch over to the swatches panel and I'm going to create a new swatch just by clicking on the new swatch icon right there. And I'm going to call this guy Rich Black. And I cannot tell you how much I recommend you do this for every illustration you create. At least, that is to say, if you're commercially reproducing the document. All right. Then go ahead and say global. That's fine because you may need to adjust it in the future. Leave black set to 100%. There's all kinds of recipes for rich blacks out there, and various presses use different rich blacks, but the one I'm about to give you is generic enough to work anywhere. It's going to actually look really great. So set black to 100% and then set everybody else to 50%. And what that means is you have total ink coverage of 100 plus 50 plus 50 plus 50. So that's 250% when you add them all together. And most presses can accommodate at least 270% ink coverage before the paper gets super saturated and the ink starts to smear. So this is going to work really great for you, by the way. It's generic, as I say. There are more specific recipes for different commercial prepress devices, but this is going to work for your everyday average printing. And then I'll click OK in order to create that new rich black. And notice it appears right after regular old black, which is awesome. Now what we need to do is replace regular old black with rich black. Now I couldn't have just double-clicked on black here and made the change because it's not a global swatch. You can see that by virtue of the fact that it doesn't have a little white wedge in the lower right corner. And I could have double-clicked on black, by the way, and switched it to global. But until you select global and start applying black to those objects, then there are no links. You can't create links retroactively. So it's not going to do you any good, in other words. So I'm going to cancel out. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on an object that I know is filled with black, such as this rearmost four-pointed star. And I can confirm that it's filled with black by going to the color panel. Sure enough, 0, 0, 0, 100%. All right, then go up to the control panel and click the down-pointing arrowhead that's associated with the Select Similar Options icon and choose Fill Color. You don't want all because that's going to rule out anything that has a stroke, because this guy doesn't have a stroke currently, so any object that's filled with black but also has a stroke would be ruled out by all. Fill color is all you care about. That's going to select a ton of objects inside the illustration. Because you're trying to change the fill, make sure the fill is active. Switch over to the swatches panel and then click on Rich Black. And now you have a global relationship that is a linked relationship between those objects and Rich Black if you ever need to change the recipe for Rich Black based on the input of your commercial printer. All right, so you are in good shape, my friends. Now I'm going to click off of my illustration to deselect it once again. Now let's find an object that's stroked with black. And I think it's going to be easiest to select this guy right there because he's not part of a group. This large circle that bisects the points in the 8-pointed star. And again, to confirm, let's go to the color panel and let's click on the stroke to make it active. And sure enough, C, M, and Y are 0, K is 100%. So let's go up to the Select Similar icon once again, click on the down pointing arrowhead, and choose this time Stroke Color. We don't care about stroke weight, we don't care about fill, we don't care about anything else, just the stroke color. And that'll select 50 bazillion objects inside of this illustration. Make sure that the stroke is still active here in the color panel. Switch over to swatches, click on Rich Black once again, and watch those blacks deepen up on screen. Now you should see them get darker on screen. If they don't look darker on screen, that's because you didn't follow my instructions earlier. I'll go ahead and click off the artwork to deselect it. I'll press Control-K or Command-K on the Mac. This is very important. I explained it at the outset, but I'll explain it again in context now. I'm going to switch over from General to Appearance of Black. Remember that guy? And you want to make sure on screen display all blacks accurately. That way you can see when your blacks are weak, which they were before, and you can see that they are now rich, which they are inside of this illustration. You want to see that your fixes have occurred. You want a realistic view of your commercially reproducible artwork. All right, so I'll cancel out because I already had things set properly. Now I'll switch back to the wide view of my illustration in progress, and you can see how much better it looks thanks to the conversion of those weak blacks to rich blacks here inside Illustrator.